in a courtroom filled with tension and curiosity. A seemingly ordinary trial takes an unexpected turn when Judge Mary Dos Santos is confronted with a piece of her tragic past, a necklace worn by the defendant that mirrors the one her daughter wore the day she disappeared 12 years ago. As the weight of old memories and unanswered questions consume her, Mary faints, leaving everyone in shock. What follows is a journey through painful truths, long-buried secrets, and a race against time to uncover what happened to her daughter. With a relentless investigator determined to reveal the truth, this story unravels a web of lies, betrayal, and a glimmer of hope for redemption. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell to avoid missing any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, a palpable heaviness that seemed to press down on everyone present. It was the kind of unease that stifles the breath, casting an ominous cloud over even the most mundane proceedings. But today was far from mundane. All eyes were on Judge Mary Dos Santos as she entered the room with her usual air of authority, her footsteps echoing sharply against the cold marble floor. Yet, beneath her polished exterior, something stirred, an unshakable feeling she couldn't quite name. For weeks, a creeping sense of dread had been gnawing at the edges of her consciousness, a faint whisper she tried to ignore. Today, that whisper would roar to life. As she took her seat, her eyes moved toward the defendant, Philip Matthews. His face was impassive, his posture calm. Yet something about him made Mary's pulse quicken, though she couldn't say why. He wore a suit that had seen better days, the fabric frayed at the edges as though it, too, had endured more than it was meant to. But none of this mattered. Not his face, not his demeanor, none of it prepared her for what would send her world crashing down in an instant. Then, her gaze caught something small but unmistakably familiar. There, hanging around Philip's neck, was a necklace, a simple, worn piece of jewelry that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but not by her. No, not by her. Her heart seemed to stop, frozen in time as her mind tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. And yet, there it was, a necklace identical to the one her daughter, Louise, had been wearing the day she disappeared 12 long, agonizing years ago. A necklace she had searched for, dreamed about, and prayed over in the darkest nights of her grief, only to be met with the cruel silence of the universe. At that moment, the walls of the courtroom seemed to close in, the buzzing murmur of the crowd growing distant and hollow as if she were submerged underwater. Her fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair, trying to ground herself in reality, but the ground beneath her had already shifted. How could this be? Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one more terrifying than the last. How did this man, this stranger, come to possess the very thing that had been ripped from her life along with her daughter? Did this mean no, it couldn't, had he been involved in Louise's disappearance all along? The memory of that terrible day surged through her like a flood, drowning her in its intensity. Louise's laughter, carefree and innocent, echoed in her mind, her voice so real it hurt. She remembered the way the sunlight had caught on that necklace, reflecting little flecks of gold that had seemed to dance in the air. She remembered watching Louise walk away, her heart swelling with love and pride, not knowing that it would be the last time she would ever see her daughter's face. That necklace had been a symbol of hope, a promise of bright days ahead. Now it felt like a harbinger of doom. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Mary's throat tightened, her chest heaving as she struggled to maintain her composure. The prosecutor's voice droned on, presenting the opening argument, but his words were a distant hum in her ears, drowned out by the roar of her thoughts. She couldn't take her eyes off the necklace, that cursed piece of metal that had suddenly become the center of her world. She felt the memories pulling her down, dragging her into an abyss of regret, guilt, and overwhelming sorrow. Each thought hit her like a hammer, pounding relentlessly against her fragile hold on reality. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was sit there, staring at the past that had somehow resurfaced in the most horrific of ways. Her vision blurred, tears threatening to spill as her body betrayed her with a tremor she couldn't suppress. The courtroom around her became a blur of indistinct faces and voices, all merging into a single deafening noise. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking as though the very air had thickened. She could barely breathe, each inhale shallow and labored. Her hands shook as they gripped the bench, her knuckles white with the effort of keeping herself grounded, but nothing could ground her now. The necklace, that cursed necklace, was like a lead weight dragging her into a pit of despair. The memories assaulted her in waves. Louise, her little girl, with her bright eyes and endless curiosity about the world. The sound of her giggles as they played in the garden. The warmth of her hand in Mary's as they walked together. Every detail was sharp, vivid, and painful. And then, the day Louise disappeared. The day that had shattered Mary's world, leaving her with nothing but an endless, aching void. She had spent years searching for answers, years hoping against hope that Louise would come back, that somehow, miraculously, she would return. But that hope had long since faded, replaced by a numbness that Mary had come to accept as her new reality. But now the wound was ripped open again, raw and bleeding. The questions that had haunted her for so long were now staring her in the face, embodied in the man sitting before her. How did he have that necklace? What had he done to her daughter? Was he responsible for all those years of pain, of not knowing? The thought made her stomach turn, a wave of nausea rolling through her. She tried to steady herself, but the dizziness was overwhelming. Her vision darkened at the edges, and she fought to stay conscious, to cling to the fragile thread of control she still had. But it was too late. The weight of her emotions, the sheer force of her grief was too much. And then everything went black. Judge Mary dos Santos collapsed, her body crumpling as the courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps and shouts filled the air. The once orderly room now a storm of confusion and panic. Lawyers rushed to her side, calling for help as security guards tried to restore order. The murmurs turned to frantic whispers, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. On the defendant's bench, Philip Matthews sat frozen, his wide eyes betraying his alarm as he watched the scene unfold. He didn't understand what had just happened, didn't know how a simple piece of jewelry could trigger such an intense reaction. To him, the necklace had always been a relic of the past, a token of friendship that he had kept with care. But now it seemed that past was coming back to haunt him in ways he had never anticipated. As Mary was carried out of the courtroom, unconscious and pale, Philip was escorted back to his cell, his mind reeling. The weight of what had just occurred settled heavily on his shoulders, but he had no idea how deep the consequences would run. The necklace, which had once been a symbol of innocence, had now become the key to a mystery that would unravel not just his life, but the lives of everyone involved. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, that the truth, whatever it was far darker and more complex than he could have ever imagined. And as he sat in his cold, dimly lit cell, the whispers of the past closed in on him, just as they had on the judge who had collapsed before his eyes. At the hospital, Mary lay still, her body slowly waking from the faint, her mind a swirl of emotions. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the room, but her thoughts were far from the present moment. Her breath quickened as she replayed the sight of that necklace around Philip's around, the same necklace her daughter had worn on the day she disappeared 12 years ago. It was no coincidence. It couldn't be. That necklace was the key to unlocking the torment she had carried with her for over a decade. But doubt gnawed at her, a relentless, insidious whisper. Was Philip truly guilty? Or was this a symbol of something much deeper, something far more tangled than she could have imagined? The case, once a simple criminal proceeding, had now transformed into something far more personal, intricate, and haunting. The courtroom drama had spilled into Mary's private hell, and the lines between justice and her own need for answers had blurred. The truth was no longer just a matter of legal consequence, it was the salvation or condemnation of her very soul. Assigned to unravel the mystery was investigator Simon Reynolds, a man whose reputation preceded him. With over 3 decades of experience in the field, Simon was known for his unrelenting pursuit of the truth and his knack for finding answers where others had long given up. He had a sharp eye for details and a gut instinct that rarely led him astray. As he took on this case, he knew immediately that this wasn't just another routine investigation. There was something deeply unsettling about it, a feeling that the answers were hidden beneath layers of deceit, grief, and secrets buried so deep they might never see the light of day. Simon's investigation began with the necklace, now secured in an evidence bag on his cluttered desk, glowing faintly under the harsh fluorescent office lights. It seemed to hum with an energy of its own, as if begging for its story to be told. Simon had learned long ago that sometimes the smallest objects held the greatest secrets, and this necklace, unremarkable in appearance, was no exception. He pored over old records, tracking down jewelers, scouring sales logs, and cross-referencing anything that could lead him to an answer. Days turned into sleepless nights, and the more he dug, the more the mystery deepened. The necklace, it turned out, was custom-made, a unique piece crafted exactly 12 years ago, around the time of Louise's disappearance. It had been purchased anonymously, the buyer paying in cash, leaving no trace behind. This revelation sent a chill down Simon's spine. Whoever had bought this necklace had gone to great lengths to hide their identity. The next step was clear. He needed to confront Philip directly. In the interrogation room, the air was thick with tension. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Simon sat across from Philip, a man whose face betrayed little but weariness. Philip had been in prison for years, protesting his innocence at every turn, but the weight of his imprisonment had taken its toll. He seemed calm, but his eyes flickered with unease as Simon placed the evidence bag with the necklace between them on the cold metal table. "Let's get straight to the point," Simon began, his voice measured but firm. He leaned forward, his gaze locked onto Philip. "This necklace, it's one of a kind. Custom made. Who gave it to you?" Philip's eyes flickered toward the necklace, and for a moment, something shifted in his expression: pain, maybe even regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He took a breath, steadying himself. "It was a gift," he replied, his voice low and controlled, "from friends. That's all I can tell you." Simon's patience was already wearing thin. "Friends," he pressed. "Who are they? Why hide their names if they're innocent? You need to help yourself here, Philip. The more you withhold, the worse it looks for you." Philip's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on Simon, unflinching. "I can't say. They have nothing to do with this, and I had nothing to do with Louise. I swear." The frustration in Simon's chest tightened like a vice. Philip's refusal to cooperate only added fuel to the fire of suspicion. With no more answers to pry from him at that moment, Simon rose from his chair, giving Philip one last long look before leaving the room. Back at his office, the unanswered questions loomed larger than ever. Simon knew that the key to breaking this case wide open wasn't just the necklace, it was the connections buried in Philip's past. He began to sift through old files, pulling every missing person's case from the last decade that bore even a remote resemblance to Louise's disappearance. As the hours ticked by and the pile of papers grew taller, Simon's instincts led him to something disturbing, something that sent a chill down his spine. There were patterns. Threads linking Philip to other unsolved cases, threads so faint they had been missed the first time around. But now, in the cold light of Simon's scrutiny, they began to take shape. Several young women had vanished under similar circumstances, their disappearances hauntingly alike. And in at least two of the cases, Philip's name had surfaced not as a suspect, but as someone who had been in the periphery, mentioned briefly in witness statements. This was no longer about one necklace, one missing girl. It was about something larger, darker, more sinister. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they painted was far from clear. Simon knew one thing for sure: he was dealing with a web of secrets that stretched far beyond Philip Matthews and into a past that was darker than anyone had realized. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Mary lay awake, her mind a battlefield of doubt, fear, and hope. She had waited so long for answers, and now they were within reach. But with every step closer to the truth, new questions emerged. What did Philip know about Louise? Was he telling the truth when he claimed he wasn't involved? And perhaps most terrifying of all, was she finally about to discover what had happened to her daughter all those years ago, or would the truth be too unbearable to face? As Simon continued his investigation, the walls around the mystery began to close in, and the truth, whatever it was about to come crashing down. But would it bring justice, or would it unravel more lives in the process? Only time would tell, and time, it seemed, was running out. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Simon Reynolds felt the weight of the investigation grow heavier with each passing day. What had started as a search for the truth behind a single necklace had now evolved into something far more sinister. The missing reports, altered documents, and the reluctance of his colleagues to dig deeper had sent a chilling message: someone powerful didn't want this case solved. Worse, it wasn't just about Philip Matthews or Louise's disappearance anymore. It was about an intricate web of corruption, deceit, and an organization that operated in the shadows, the Sentinels. Sitting in his dimly lit office, Simon shuffled through piles of papers, files, and evidence strewn across his desk. The name Sentinels was more than just a whisper now. It had become a glaring thread that connected not just Philip's case, but several unresolved disappearances that stretched back years. The more Simon dug, the more the pieces began to fit together. The Sentinels, with their network of influence, money, and power, seemed to have their hands in everything from law enforcement to business, from the courts to the streets. They were a ghost organization, present but invisible, hiding in plain sight while pulling the strings of everyone who came too close to the truth. As Simon sat staring at the necklace, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was the key to unraveling everything. The small, seemingly insignificant piece of jewelry had become a symbol of something far greater, a link to Louise, yes, but also to the darkness that had swallowed her and so many others whole. The Sentinels, it seemed, had been responsible for more than just Louise's disappearance. Other girls, other victims, had vanished under similarly mysterious circumstances, and each time there had been subtle signs pointing to the organization's involvement. However, no one had dared to pursue those leads either because they were paid off or silenced by fear. Simon's investigation was becoming more dangerous by the day. His confrontation with his superior had been a stark reminder of the forces working against him. The veiled threat to let it go was still fresh in his mind, and he knew exactly what it meant. He was treading in dangerous waters. But Simon was not the kind of man to back down, no matter the cost. He had a reputation for persistence, and this case had struck a nerve deep within him. If Philip was innocent, if he had simply been a pawn in a much larger game, then Simon owed it to him and Mary to uncover the truth. He replayed the tense conversation in his head. The superior's voice had been calm but cold. "Let it go, Simon. The case is already complicated enough. You don't need to stir up trouble." But Simon had been doing this long enough to know when someone was trying to cover their tracks. There was more at play here than just a complicated case. The Sentinels had influence in places Simon could only imagine, and the deeper he went, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a battle for justice, it was a battle for survival. Simon decided it was time to confront his colleagues. He needed to know how far the rot went. Sitting down with Detective Michael Owens, a longtime friend and fellow investigator, Simon carefully broached the subject of the missing reports and altered documents. Michael's expression immediately darkened, his normally jovial demeanor vanishing as he glanced nervously around the room. "Simon," he said in a low voice, leaning forward across the table, "you don't know what you're getting into. This thing, it's bigger than you think. People higher up, they're involved. They've been covering for the Sentinels for years. If you keep digging, you're going to end up just like those reports missing." Simon's stomach churned, but he kept his face impassive. Michael's words only confirmed what he already suspected. The corruption ran deep, and the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. Still, Simon wasn't deterred. If anything, Michael's warning fueled his resolve. He returned to his office, diving deeper into Philip's past, sifting through old cases with renewed urgency. Hours turned into days as Simon worked through the nights, piecing together fragments of information that had been overlooked or intentionally buried. He traced Philip's connections, examining every link to the disappearances, every name, every thread that led back to the Sentinels. It was then that Simon made a disturbing discovery. The necklace, which had once seemed like an isolated clue, was part of a much larger pattern. Similar pieces of jewelry had surfaced in several other cases, each linked to the disappearance of young women, each tied to the Sentinels in some way. These necklaces were custom-made, gifted to the victims as part of some twisted ritual or marking, and each time they disappeared along with the girls until now. The connection was undeniable. Philip may have been a victim himself, unwittingly dragged into the Sentinels' dark dealings, or perhaps he knew more than he was letting on. Either way, Simon was certain that the necklace was the key to breaking the case wide open. But he needed more than just speculation. He needed hard evidence, something that could bring down the entire operation. Determined to find answers, Simon made a call to an old contact, someone outside the reach of the police force. A former intelligence officer turned private investigator, Jack Tanner had access to resources and people who weren't afraid to go up against powerful adversaries. Jack agreed to meet with Simon, and within hours they were poring over documents, building a case that could expose the Sentinels for what they truly were. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. The Sentinels weren't just an organized crime syndicate, they were a shadow government, operating within the cracks of society, influencing decisions at the highest levels. They trafficked in secrets, power, and people, and they used their reach to bury anyone who got too close. The disappearances were just one facet of their operation, but now, thanks to Simon's investigation, the pieces were starting to fall into place. As Simon sat back, exhausted but determined, he knew that he was on the verge of something monumental. He had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched far beyond what he had originally imagined, and the Sentinels were at the heart of it all. But exposing them would require more than just evidence. It would require bravery, cunning, and a willingness to risk everything. Simon made a silent vow as he stared at the necklace once more. He would find out what happened to Louise. He would clear Philip's name if he was innocent, and he would bring the Sentinels crashing down, no matter the cost. The darkness was about to be exposed, and Simon Reynolds was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant going to war with those who were supposed to be on his side. As Philip Matthews sat in his cell, he felt the weight of his silence growing heavier by the day. He had always known more than he let on about Louise's disappearance, but the web of loyalties, promises, and secrets had kept his lips sealed. He had hoped, prayed even, that someone else would uncover the truth without him having to betray those he cared about. Now, as Simon Reynolds inched closer to exposing the hidden layers of this case, Philip realized that the past he had kept buried was finally being unearthed. He feared what would happen when it all came crashing down. In the world outside his prison walls, Simon was walking a dangerous path. The more he delved into the case, the more convoluted it became. What had started as a mystery surrounding a simple necklace had spiraled into a deep, insidious conspiracy that extended far beyond anything Simon had imagined. The Sentinels were not just another criminal organization, they were a shadowy empire, with tentacles reaching into law enforcement, politics, and even his precinct. Simon now knew that the very people he was supposed to rely on could not be trusted. Working in secret, Simon kept his findings to himself, aware that one wrong move could blow his investigation wide open and put his life in danger. He isolated himself, reviewing files alone in his office late into the night, always on edge, always looking over his shoulder. The tension within the department was palpable. Every glance, every interaction was suspect. Trust had become a luxury he couldn't afford, and paranoia was his only safeguard. In this atmosphere of suspicion, Simon arranged a clandestine meeting with a trusted informant. This was no ordinary source, it was someone who had lived in the underworld, seen its darkest corners, and survived by playing both sides. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes of corrupt colleagues or hidden cameras. The warehouse was dimly lit, its vast space filled only with the echoes of creaking metal and distant footsteps. The smell of rust and dust filled the air as Simon waited, knowing this meeting could change everything. The informant, a man with a rough past and a reputation for delivering valuable intelligence, arrived punctually, his eyes darting around nervously as he approached. He lit a cigarette, the orange glow briefly illuminating the lines of his face, etched with years of experience in surviving dangerous deals. "The Sentinels are more dangerous than you think," Simon the informant said quietly, exhaling smoke into the cold night air. "They have eyes everywhere, even in your department." Simon's jaw tightened. He had already suspected as much. The missing reports, the altered documents, someone was trying to erase the past and derail the investigation. "I need more than that," Simon replied, his voice calm but insistent. "Who's behind the Sentinels? Who's pulling the strings?" The informant took another long drag from his cigarette before speaking again. "There's a name you need to know. Logan Swanson. He's at the top of this whole operation, and he has a direct connection to Louise, the judge's daughter." Simon's heart skipped a beat. What kind of connection? Is Louise alive? His voice faltered, the weight of that possibility hanging in the air. The informant nodded slowly. "Yes, she's alive. She's been with Logan for years now, but how she got involved with him, I don't know the full story. What I do know is that Logan is dangerous, and Louise, she's caught up in something much bigger than just her disappearance." Simon's mind raced. Louise had been missing for 12 years, and now he was being told she wasn't just a victim, but somehow part of this larger, darker scheme. What had happened to her during those lost years, and how had Philip been drawn into this? He needed answers, and the name Logan Swanson was the key to getting them. Returning to his office, Simon felt the pieces of the puzzle shift into a new, terrifying alignment. Louise was not merely a missing person, she was entangled in a criminal empire, and Logan Swanson held the strings. As Simon pieced together what he had learned, he realized that Philip Matthews was not just an innocent man caught in the crossfire. He had known about Louise's connection to Logan all along. Perhaps Philip had been protecting her, perhaps he had been complicit, or maybe he had been too afraid to speak. Whatever the case, the time for silence was over. Simon knew he needed to act quickly. He spent days preparing, carefully gathering evidence, and solidifying his plan to take down Logan Swanson and the Sentinels. With every step, he was acutely aware of the danger. The Sentinels had people in high places, politicians, business leaders, and even police officers. One wrong move and his operation would be blown before it even started. When the time came, Simon and a select few officers he trusted moved in on Logan's secluded estate. It was a massive property, hidden away in a dense forest far from the city. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Simon's team advanced quietly through the trees, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were determined, moving with the precision of a military unit. Every footstep was calculated, every breath measured. The only sound was the rustling of leaves underfoot and the faint crackle of their radios. The raid itself was swift and tactical. Doors were kicked in, rooms were cleared, and within minutes, Logan Swanson was found in his lavish living room, seated in an armchair like a king awaiting his audience. He did not attempt to resist as he was handcuffed, but the look in his eyes was cold, calculating like a man who knew something they didn't. Simon stood over him, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was so close to the truth he could almost taste it. Logan's capture was the culmination of weeks of intense work, sleepless nights, and constant danger. But what came next was something Simon could never have predicted. As Logan was led out in handcuffs, one of the officers approached Simon with a grave expression. "You're not going to believe this," he said, handing Simon a small, crumpled note found in Logan's possession. Simon unfolded it, his heart racing as he read the chilling message. "I have Louise. She's alive, but not for long if you continue down this path. Stop, or the next time you see her, it will be too late." The room seemed to spin as the reality of the situation hit Simon like a freight train. Logan Swanson was not just another criminal to be taken down, he was the puppet master, and Louise was still very much in his grasp. The stakes had just risen to a terrifying new level, and Simon knew that the real battle was only just beginning. The truth was still buried, and if Simon was going to save Louise, he would have to dig deeper into the abyss, ready to face whatever dark secrets awaited him there. Louise sat quietly, her calm demeanor almost unsettling against the turmoil swirling in the room. She looked directly at her mother, her eyes betraying no fear, no shame, only a strange kind of acceptance. For a moment, she didn't respond, allowing the silence to stretch between them, heavy with years of pain, loss, and unspoken truths. Mary, her face pale and drawn, stared back at her daughter, struggling to reconcile the image of the girl she had once known with the woman sitting in front of her. Finally, Louise spoke, her voice steady and measured. "I had to, Mom. You never understood what it was like to live under your control. Every part of my life was dictated by your expectations, your rules, your idea of who I should be. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't be me." Mary flinched as if she had been struck. The words cut deep, but they also brought back memories of countless arguments, of trying to mold Louise into someone she thought would thrive, succeed, and stay safe in a world that could be so unforgiving. But had she been too rigid? Had her love and protection become a prison for her daughter? "You could have told me," Mary whispered, her voice trembling. "You could have come to me, Louise, running away, faking your kidnapping. It destroyed me. It destroyed us. You have no idea what I went through. How could you do this?" Louise's expression softened for the first time. "I did think about telling you, but you wouldn't have listened. You never listened. It was always about what you thought was best for me, what you wanted for my life. And then Logan came along, and he offered me a way out, a way to escape the life I didn't want. So we made a plan." Mary shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "Logan? The man who dragged you into this mess? This life of lies and crime? You think he saved you?" "He didn't drag me into anything," Louise said, her tone firm. "He gave me a choice. For once, I had control over my own life. Yes, we orchestrated my disappearance, but it was because I needed to get away, to live on my terms. Logan didn't force me, I made the decision." Mary's hands clenched into fists, her voice rising. "And what about me, Louise? What about the life you left behind? You let me believe you were dead or worse. For 12 years, I had nothing but pain, sleepless nights, and questions that tore me apart. I lived every day with the guilt that I couldn't protect you, that I had failed you. Do you even understand what that did to me?" For the first time, Louise's calm facade cracked. Her gaze dropped to the table between them, and she took a deep breath. "I know I hurt you, I know. But Mom, I couldn't come back. I thought about it so many times, but I was already too far gone. I was living a different life, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it was to face you. I didn't know how to undo it." Mary's voice broke. "You didn't even try." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The room fell into silence again, thick with the weight of the years they had lost. Mary stared at her daughter, searching her face for the girl she had once known, the girl she had loved more than anything. But all she saw now was a woman hardened by choices, a stranger who had walked away from everything she had tried to give her. Finally, Louise spoke, her voice quieter now, more reflective. "I thought you'd be better off without me. I thought you'd move on. But I was wrong. I see that now. I didn't realize how much damage I'd done, not just to you, but to Philip, to everyone. I made a mistake, but I didn't know how to fix it." Mary's tears fell freely now, her heart torn between anger and the deep, aching love she still had for her daughter. "Philip is in prison because of you, Louise. He's been suffering for years, protecting you, keeping your secret while his life crumbled around him. Don't you understand what that means? He stayed silent, even when he could have freed himself because he loved you, and you let him rot there." Louise swallowed hard, the guilt finally surfacing in her eyes. I know. Philip didn't deserve any of this. I thought I was helping him by keeping him out of it, but I was selfish. I let him take the fall for something he didn't do, and I didn't stop it. I was too scared of what would happen if the truth came out. I thought if I stayed hidden, everything would just fade away." Mary's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter, no longer the calm, controlled woman who had walked into that room, but someone lost, vulnerable, trying to justify years of decisions that had shattered so many lives. Mary wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "You need to make this right, Louise. You need to tell the truth, clear Philip's name, and take responsibility for what you've done. I can't protect you anymore." Louise looked up, her eyes wide with fear and sorrow. "I know, I will. I'll confess everything. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to face you. But I'll do it, for Philip. For you." Mary stood, the weight of their conversation settling heavily on her shoulders. She reached out, placing a hand on Louise's, the touch filled with years of love, pain, and hope. "It's time, Louise. Time to face the consequences and rebuild what's left of our lives." Louise nodded, her eyes filling with tears for the first time. As Mary turned to leave, she paused at the door, looking back at the daughter she had mourned for so long. "I love you, Louise. I always will. But this will take time." Louise watched her mother leave, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with guilt, remorse, and the consequences of her actions. But for the first time in years, she was ready to face the truth. As Mary left the building, the weight of the revelation settled in her chest. She had found her daughter, but the girl she had lost was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had made choices she could never fully understand. The journey ahead would be painful, but it was one they would have to walk together, one step at a time. As Simon continued his investigation, now with the full truth in hand, he knew that while the case had reached its conclusion, the healing for everyone involved had only just begun. Louise inhaled deeply, every breath trembling as if it carried the weight of years of pain, love, and secrets. Her heart hammered against her chest, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked with the force of her emotions. "Mom, I needed freedom. I loved Logan, I truly did, but you never gave him a chance. You never saw him for who he was. You were always there, hovering over me, controlling me, deciding what was best for me like I was incapable of choosing for myself. I was suffocating, Mom. Every day felt like I was drowning under your expectations and your judgments. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break free." Mary's body stiffened, her hands clenched in her lap, as if trying to grasp the enormity of Louise's words. Her heart raced, torn between disbelief and the deep ache of understanding. "So your answer was to run away, to disappear, leaving everyone who loved you to think you were dead, kidnapped, or worse. You didn't just hurt me, Louise. You destroyed us. Do you even understand what that did to me? What it did do to Philip?" The mention of Philip's name hit Louise like a knife to the chest, and her gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet her mother's burning eyes. Her voice wavered as she whispered, "I know, Mom. I know I hurt him, hurt all of you, and I'm so sorry. I never imagined it would go this far. I didn't mean to drag anyone else into this mess, especially Philip. That necklace he wore, it was supposed to be something good, something beautiful. It was a gift from Logan and me, a symbol of the bond we shared. I thought it would remind us that even when we were apart, we were still connected. But I never thought that Philip would suffer because of me, that he'd be caught in the crossfire of my choices." Louise's words reverberated through the room, crashing into Mary's heart like waves against a jagged shore, eroding the walls of anger she had built up over the years. The judge, who had once believed she had done everything in her power to protect her daughter, to shield her from the dangers of the world, now found herself facing a devastating truth. Perhaps her love, her relentless control, and her iron grip on Louise's life had not been protection at all. Perhaps it had been the very thing that pushed her daughter into Logan's arms and a life built on lies and desperation. Regret, sharp and unforgiving, slashed through Mary's chest, twisting her insides with guilt. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen what she was doing to her own child? Every decision she had made, every moment of their past together came rushing back to her in brutal clarity, each choice more bitter than the last. What had she done? What had she allowed to happen? "You have no idea what you've done to me," Mary's voice cracked, the tears she had tried so hard to suppress finally spilling down her cheeks, each drop a testament to the years of anguish she had endured. "Do you know what it was like? The sleepless nights, wondering if you were lying dead somewhere or in the hands of some monster. Every single day, the not knowing tore me apart. And Philip, I blamed him. I judged him without listening, without giving him a chance. I treated him like a criminal when all he wanted was to love you." Louise's legs felt weak, her heart pounding in her throat as she took a hesitant step forward, her hand trembling as she reached out to her mother. "Mom, I don't know if anything I say can ever make this right. I acted out of love, yes, but it was a desperate, confused kind of love. I wanted so badly to be free, to live my life on my own terms. But I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you or Philip or anyone. I was just trying to find myself, and in doing that, I lost everything." Mary's eyes, once so hard and unforgiving, softened as she looked at her daughter. For the first time, she truly saw Louise not as the rebellious child she had tried to control, not as the daughter who had run away, but as a young woman who had been broken by the very choices she thought would save her. And in Louise's pain, Mary saw a reflection of her own. The control she had clung to, the rigid expectations she had imposed, they had been as much a prison for her as they had been for Louise. They were both trapped, both victims of choices they couldn't undo. The anger, the years of resentment and blame began to dissolve, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Mary reached out and pulled Louise into her arms. It wasn't the kind of embrace they had shared when Louise was a child back then. Hugs were easy, free of the burdens of the past. Now their embrace was heavy, weighted down by years of silence, misunderstandings, and unspoken pain. But in that moment, it was enough. It was the first step toward healing the wounds that had festered for so long. Louise buried her face in her mother's shoulder, the floodgates of her emotions finally breaking open. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything." Mary held her tighter, her own tears mingling with her daughter's. "I know, sweetheart. I know. And I'm sorry too. I failed you. I see that now. But we can fix this. We can make things right together." As they clung to each other, Mary's mind raced with everything that still needed to be done. Philip's name hung in the air like a ghost, a constant reminder of the injustices she had allowed. She had been the judge who presided over his trial, who had condemned him based on lies and assumptions. But now, with Simon Reynolds' investigation and Louise's revelations, the truth was finally emerging. The case that had once seemed so clear-cut was unraveling, exposing the deep flaws in the system that had led to Philip's wrongful conviction. When Mary finally pulled away from Louise, she wiped the tears from her cheeks, a newfound determination burning in her eyes. "I have to make this right, Louise. Philip doesn't deserve what happened to him. I'm going to fight for him, for his innocence. It won't be easy, but I'll do whatever it takes to clear his name." Louise nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and guilt. "Thank you, Mom. I never wanted him to suffer because of me." Mary gave a small, sad smile. "We both have a lot to make up for, but we'll get through this, one step at a time." The journey ahead would be long, and the road to redemption would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in years, Mary felt hope. She had been a judge all her life, but now she was ready to stand as something else, as a mother, as a woman seeking forgiveness for the mistakes of the past. As the courtroom filled once more, the air buzzed with anticipation. The trial of Philip Matthews, once shrouded in uncertainty and suspicion, was now being revisited with fresh eyes, thanks to Simon's relentless pursuit of the truth and Louise's courage to come forward. Simon sat quietly in the back, watching the proceedings unfold. There was a quiet sense of satisfaction within him, a relief that the truth was finally being acknowledged. The evidence he had worked so hard to gather, testimonies, documents, proof of the manipulations within the system was now being laid bare for all to see. The defense attorney presented it all with precision, each piece of evidence a blow to the prosecution's case. Mary sat in the audience, not as a judge but as a mother, a witness to the truth, and a woman seeking redemption. It was a strange, uncomfortable role for her to play, but she accepted it. She had to. For Philip, for Louise, for herself. As the trial continued, Mary's mind wandered to the words she had prepared, the statement she knew she had to make. It was a heavy burden to carry, but it was hers to bear. She would stand before the court and speak the truth, no matter how painful. For Philip, for her daughter, for all the years that had been lost. When it was Mary's turn to testify, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The silence that followed her every step as she approached the witness stand was almost suffocating. Every eye was on her, waiting, anticipating. This wasn't just another statement, it was a reckoning. Mary knew that her words would not only determine the course of the trial, but also be the first step in her own path toward redemption. She stood tall, her heart pounding, but her resolve steady. Her gaze found Philip, seated at the defendant's bench, his eyes a mixture of pain and hope. Then, slowly, she turned her attention to the judge, the weight of years of guilt and responsibility pressing down on her chest. She took a deep, trembling breath. "Your Honor, members of the court, and everyone present," she began, her voice steady yet heavy with emotion. "I stand before you today not just as a witness to the failure of our justice system, but as someone who has personally failed to see the truth. I have failed Philip Matthews. I have failed my daughter, and in my own way, I have failed myself." The courtroom remained eerily still as her words hung in the air. There was a weight to them, a vulnerability that cut through the usual formalities of the law. "For years, I believed I was protecting my daughter," Mary continued, her voice cracking slightly. "I thought that by controlling her decisions, by imposing my will, I was keeping her safe from harm. But in my efforts to protect her, I became blind to her needs, her desires, and her love. I became blind to the truth. And because of my blindness, Philip Matthews, an innocent man, was dragged into a nightmare that he did not deserve. I didn't listen to his side, and instead I allowed my fears, my pain, to shape my judgment." Her voice wavered as she spoke about the pressure she had placed on Louise, the control she had imposed without realizing how deeply it was suffocating her daughter. The control that had driven Louise to run, to rebel, and ultimately to leave. Tears welled up in her eyes as she turned her gaze back to Philip. "Philip Matthews is an innocent man," she declared, her voice breaking with the force of her conviction. "He was caught in a storm that I helped create. I ask for forgiveness from him, from this court, and from everyone who suffered due to the injustice that has persisted for so long. I let my pain guide my decisions, and in doing so, I contributed to a system that wrongfully condemned him." The courtroom was silent, but the emotional intensity was palpable. People shifted in their seats, moved by the rawness of Mary's confession. It was rare for a woman of her stature, a judge so respected, to stand in such vulnerability and admit her faults. Yet here she was, laying bare her regrets for all to see. As Mary returned to her seat, a quiet murmur rippled through the room. The impact of her words was clear on the faces of the jurors, on the expressions of the audience, and most of all, on Philip. He sat motionless, his eyes glistening with emotion, but there was a serenity in him that hadn't been there before. It was as if, for the first time in years, he could breathe again. He knew the truth was finally being heard, and with that came the beginning of his release from the years of torment and injustice. The judge, solemn and reflective, did not take long to deliberate. The new evidence, combined with Mary's powerful testimony, was undeniable. Philip Matthews was declared innocent of all charges. The words seemed to echo throughout the courtroom as a murmur of relief spread through the audience. Quiet, subdued applause followed, but to Philip, it felt like a roar. He exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with the release of the unbearable weight he had carried for so long. Justice, long delayed, had finally come. As the court proceedings concluded, the case that had once been a cloud of uncertainty and false accusations was now seen in the light of truth. The battle wasn't just for Philip, it was for justice itself. Simon Reynolds, who had pursued that truth relentlessly, stood in the back, his heart swelling with a sense of quiet triumph. His investigations had not only cleared Philip, but had begun to unravel the corrupt system that had enabled the wrongful conviction. The Sentinels organization, long used as a myth to justify disappearances, was now exposed, and those involved were being held accountable. Simon had fought tirelessly, and now his efforts were being rewarded. Outside the courtroom, as the day neared its end, Philip approached Mary. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unsaid words, with years of resentment, guilt, and regret. But in their silence, there was also something else, a shared understanding, a recognition of their roles in the mess that had nearly destroyed them both. Philip nodded slowly, his eyes meeting Mary's with a softness that spoke louder than words. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of forgiveness, of letting go of the past. Mary, her heart full of emotions she could barely name, nodded back. "I'm so sorry, Philip, for everything." They didn't need to say more. There were no long speeches, no dramatic exchanges, just a mutual acknowledgement that they were both ready to move forward, not necessarily as friends, but as two people who had been broken by the same tragedy and who now had a chance to heal. As they walked out of the courthouse, the world felt different, lighter. The burden of lies, guilt, and resentment had been lifted. There was still much to repair, many wounds that would take time to heal, but they had taken the first step. For Mary, this was only the beginning. The long path toward forgiveness stretched out before her, not just for Philip or Louise, but for herself. She had years of mistakes to reconcile, and it would take time to rebuild the relationships she had damaged. But now she had hope. The past no longer haunted her. It was something she could face head-on. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Back at home, under the soft golden light of the late afternoon, Mary found herself sitting with Louise and Logan. For the first time in years, their family, though fractured, was together. The tension that had defined their interactions was beginning to melt away, replaced by a tentative calm. They talked, not just about the past, but about the future, what it might look like to rebuild, to heal. Mary watched her daughter as she sat beside Logan, their hands entwined. She no longer saw Logan as a threat to her authority or her plans for Louise. Instead, she saw him as someone who had stood by her daughter's side, even when the world had turned against them. Louise had fought for her freedom, for her right to live her life on her own terms. And though her choices had caused pain, they had also shaped her into the strong, determined woman she had become. As the evening deepened, the house was filled with quiet conversation and the warmth of tentative hope. There was much still to be said, much still to work through, but for the first time they were willing to try. There was no going back to what once was, but there was a chance to create something new, something real. The journey of healing and forgiveness had just begun, but with each passing moment, it became clearer that they were all ready to walk that path together. "I know it won't be easy," Mary said softly, breaking the lingering silence, her voice carrying the weight of her emotions. "But I want to try. I want to be present, to support you both. And more than anything, I want to meet my grandchild with an open heart." Her words were laced with vulnerability, a reflection of the journey she had begun, the journey of letting go of the past, of control, and of fear. Louise's smile grew tender as she gently squeezed her mother's hand, the warmth of that simple touch bridging the gap that had long divided them. "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to us. I know we've made hard choices that hurt all of us, but we're ready to start over. We want this to be a new beginning for all of us." Logan, the man who had unknowingly been at the heart of so much discord between mother and daughter, now stepped forward, his expression filled with sincerity and respect. For so long, he had been a point of contention, but today he stood not as a source of tension, but as someone who wanted peace. He met Mary's gaze with quiet humility. "Mrs. Mary, I've always wanted the best for Louise. I never meant to take her away from you. I only wanted her to live the life she wanted. And now, all I want is for us to move forward together as a family, despite everything that's happened." Mary looked at Logan, her heart softening as the walls she had once built around herself continued to crumble. For so long, she had seen him as a threat, as someone who had stolen her daughter away. But now, in this moment of shared understanding, she saw him for what he truly was, a man who loved Louise with all his heart. She nodded slowly, the relief washing over her like a warm breeze. Acceptance, she realized, was not a sign of weakness but of strength. It was a small step, but for Mary, it felt monumental. In that step, there was space for forgiveness, for healing, and for the love that had been buried for so long under layers of pride, fear, and misunderstanding. With the impending arrival of Louise's baby, a sense of renewal filled the air, touching each of them. The future, once uncertain and fraught with unresolved pain, now held the promise of something new, a chance to rebuild, not just as individuals, but as a family. They spoke of plans to return to the city where everything had started. Mary's old house, once a symbol of control and discord, would be renovated not just structurally, but emotionally. It would become a home again, a place of warmth and belonging, open to the changes that time brings. Philip, though not physically present in this moment of reconciliation, was a part of this new chapter too. After the trial, he had chosen to move to a quiet place, far from the turmoil that had dominated his life for so many years. Though he sought peace and solitude, he remained connected to Louise and Logan, the bonds of friendship unbroken despite the chaos that had once threatened to tear them apart. Together they had endured the worst, and now, together, they were healing. As the sun began to set, casting the city in a golden glow, the three of them, Mary, Louise, and Logan, stood side by side, gazing out at the horizon. Each was lost in their own thoughts, yet they were bound by a shared sense of hope. The past, with all its scars, could never be changed, but it no longer held them captive. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, they were ready to embrace it. New memories, new smiles, and new beginnings lay ahead, and they were determined to fill the days to come with the peace they had sought for so long. For Mary, the journey ahead was about more than just moving forward. It was about rebuilding the bond she had once damaged. It was about learning to forgive herself, to allow herself grace, and to embrace the love that she had denied for so long. She knew the path wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for it. Louise and Logan stood by her side, their own wounds slowly healing. Together, they had survived the storms of the past, and together they would face the future. As the night descended, the sky glittering with stars, there was a quiet certainty that settled over them. They were finally where they needed to be, together, at peace, and ready to start again. The scars of their shared history remained, a testament to the struggles they had endured, but those scars also made them stronger. The arrival of Louise's baby symbolized not only new life, but a fresh start for all of them. Challenges would come, as they always did, but there would also be joy. And with their newfound unity, they were prepared to face anything that lay ahead. The past, once so heavy with pain and regret, had become a story that, though marked by mistakes, had also brought them here stronger, wiser, and more determined to build a life where love, understanding, and forgiveness would guide their way. And in that quiet, star-filled night, they knew that this was only the beginning. As we come to the end of this heartfelt journey, we invite you to reflect on everything you've experienced in this story. What have you learned from Mary, Louise, and Logan's path toward healing and forgiveness? Is there a moment that stood out to you, or a lesson that resonated deeply with your own life? We'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments below one thing you've learned from this story that you'll bring into your own life. Whether it's about the power of forgiveness, the courage to start over, or the strength that comes from facing the past, your reflections matter. If you like this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Together, we can continue to explore the powerful lessons that life has to offer.